In our church, we have an icon of three contemporary saints. That's Father Porphyrius, Paisius, and Yakov of Evia. These three fathers have one thing in common, and that is that their spiritual eyes are open. That well, not alive anymore, sorry. Well, they are alive, of course, in the spiritual sense, full of divine grace and the wisdom of God. This is what the three of them had. And St. Porphyrius, in fact, mentions the fact that we should, as Orthodox Christians, strive to ask God, strive to have that the eyes of our souls may be opened. The eyes of the soul, he talks about, or eyes of the heart. It's the same thing. And he mentions that, and I've been thinking about that, and then I realised that he's probably quoting from a homily by St. Macarius of Egypt, and which I have the copy of those, and actually I found it. It's homily number 14. He talks about the wisdom of God and the eyes of the soul. That when these are opened, then we begin to see as God sees. We know that St. Paisius was a wonder worker, and that he himself lived in the spiritual world. For example, he could be in two places at the same time, appearing to people on the Holy Mountain, talking to them, giving them refreshments, but actually being in Egypt, visiting. That's what I'm talking about. That's a different world, which is in which his spiritual eyes were opened so he could see and partake of the grace that God gives to his saints. Porphyrius, even as a young boy, I think he was only 12 or 13, was in the monastery in little skeet with two fathers who were old, and they went off somewhere, and he was left behind to, just to keep the place clean and say the prayers. And he then saw them on their way back, but in fact they were on the other side of the mountain, but he could see them. So when the fathers came home, he said to one of them in particular, he said, I saw you coming on the mountain. The father immediately said, well, you mustn't tell anybody about this. I will talk to you later about it and explain. He had already the gift. The eyes of his heart had been opened. This is the age of 12 or 13. And we know that there's amazing stories of St. Porphyrius who could see into the past. So he could see things that had taken place 1,000 years before in the spirit, because he lived in eternity. He lived beyond time, outside of time, and so he could see things. And the nice story which I like is going to visit the new church, and they're sitting in the car, and Elder, here, look, and we can see the church is coming up, and he's looking out the other side. Elder, it's over here. And he says, oh, well, it's a very interesting church. He's looking at a blank field, empty field. If you check the records, there used to be a church there. He could see it. These are the gifts. Now, these are not things that we should be seeking, because these are gifts of the Holy Spirit. The important thing is to have humility, so that then God is able to work through us. St. Iacovos, taking the head, in a reliquary, had the head of the saint of the monastery, St. David, carrying it, and it begins to rain, and he doesn't have an umbrella. It's very heavy rain, and he prays. He has an amazing boldness with God. He actually tells the saints what to do. He said, because the heads are going to get wet, you better do something about it. He's talking to St. David. So the rain doesn't land on him or on the relic, but it rains all the way around him. When we were in Evia, had a great privilege to venerate the head of St. David. And as a priest, I was asked to take the head from the reliquary and for the people to come and bless it. So I felt a little closeness now to St. David, who I knew nothing about. And I still don't know very much anyway. I don't think there's very much known about him. But these are little connections, and all these things, and I share with you, then you get connected. It isn't just theoretical when you're listening to me talking, but it becomes a part of you. The grace that I got from St. David and St. Jacobus, though I don't even know anything about them really, and I certainly don't feel anything. I mean, you don't start feeling things. That grace came back to our parish. And now I tell you about it, then you become contaminated. This is a spiritual virus, and this is highly contagious, and it affects us. It affects our lives. St. Porphyrius says, trusting God opens the eyes of the heart. And when the eyes of the heart are opened, then all our thoughts are turned towards God and to the mind of God, and our hearts become illumined. Now, everything that we do in this world, or in general, labour, anything work we do, we expect to get a reward. We don't do it without profit, otherwise it'd be a waste of time. Now, I'm not talking about financial profit necessarily. If you have a job, you do your job, you get paid. You expect to get paid. If you didn't get paid, you wouldn't do your job. It applies to any profession or job, is that you expect to get a reward. This is normal. St. Macarius, I'm coming back to him, he says, a farmer plants seeds expecting to get a harvest. A merchant sends off his ships across the sea hoping to receive goods. Now he's talking about sailing ships in the 5th century, so, pretty dangerous. And there's a risk involved. And if the owner of the ship goes with the ship and it sinks, then he dies as well, and so does the goods. This is a risk. Anything worth doing always has a risk attached to it. Now, for some people, this is an adventure. I mean, there's a lot of jobs at risk. There's like firefighting, there's a risk. Flying a plane. In New Zealand, it was crop spraying. That was the most highest insurance was for them because they were very, very likely to crash. Very dangerous, flying these little planes and spraying crops. So each job has its own risks. The spiritual life is the same. The reward is the kingdom of heaven, but we have to take risks. We're not going to slide into heaven by being a wimp. We've got to take risks, we have to sacrifice things, we have to trust God completely. Our mind and thoughts have to belong to God. So if you're not convinced that what you do has no profit, you won't do it. I mean, I'm not talking about when you're caught up in a job where you have to do it because you need some money. But generally speaking, we don't do things unless there is a profit in it. And it's the same with prayer. St. Paul says in Corinthians, who plows should plow in hope. And in Russian that is kto pashet, должен пахать с надеждою. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if you plow in order to plant something, you plow in hope that you're going to get a harvest. In the spiritual life, we're not seeking rewards from God, but we get them. All right? So we pray in the hope that we will receive gifts of humility, because that's the most important one, and then the rest of the things will be added to it. And of course, humility is the hardest, because we have to fight with ourselves. So the goal, our immediate goal should be to have the eyes of our heart illumined, so that we start thinking like God. This is very bold stuff when you think about it. You start thinking how God thinks. The enormity is amazing. It's terrible, actually. You suddenly have to be quiet. It says in the Psalm, be still and know that I am God. We don't find God by speculating and writing books and talking and getting excited. I mean, intellectually I'm talking about. You have to be quiet, and then God speaks to you. But until you're quiet, God does not speak to you. Or he speaks to you, but you can't hear the voice of God. The goal is having the eyes of the heart illumined, since St. Macarius of Egypt. And we, in that beautiful service of the Presanctified, when I bring out the candle to bless you, and I say, the light of Christ that illumines all men. And the blessing with the cross and the candle. The light of Christ, that is the light that illumines our hearts, and that is what we seek. And this is a relationship with a person, not some sort of religious system. It's certainly not a point system. If I do this, then I will get that, you know? So I say my prayers, I keep the fast. It's a fast day tomorrow, by the way. And a feast of St. George. And I keep the fast and I say my prayers, so now give me my reward, pay me. I've done my job. But this is not a proper relationship with God. So we mustn't, you know, everything has to be within measure, yeah? We can't just sort of say, okay, I've done this, therefore I must get a reward. No, you do get a reward, but you're not working for the reward. You're asking to be illumined so that you can be like Christ. And the first thing about Christ is be like me because I am meek, krotok, and humble. Meek and humble. This is how we attract the Holy Spirit into our lives. So we should put away worldly cares. Now that doesn't mean to put away your job. You have to do your job and you should do it professionally, whatever you do. And in studying, you should study seriously. But the worldly cares, you know what those are. And he says here, do not rely on your labors. But, he says, if you taste the goodness of the Lord then, and the fruits of the Holy Spirit, you will want to do things. So Father Sophrony used to say that we should develop a taste for prayer. A taste for prayer. Not you have to do your prayers every day. No, you should develop a taste. So it's something that you really want to do. A beginning, of course, is difficult. And we must understand that all the time, I feel this is very strong, that we should understand that we have a relationship with God. We don't have a religion. Our faith is not a religion. It is a relationship. Atnashenia, the relationship with God. That's what it's all about. And then the religious part of it, the keeping of the things we do, are secondary. You have to do them. It's not that you can't, say, well, I believe in God, so that's enough. No, it's not. You have to have a relationship. And we can only have that relationship through prayer. We can only have that relationship through fasting. But fasting and prayer doesn't automatically make us holy. That's a human, earthly view of things, because that's how we understand life. Do my job well, I get a promotion. It doesn't work like that spiritually. St. Macarius says in the homily that we know that the sun shines on the just and on the unjust. But it is only those who are begotten of Christ who taste the heavenly food. We are very privileged as Orthodox Christians. We are privileged because we are begotten of Christ. We do not belong to the world. We're in it and we have to function in it, but we do not belong to it. We belong to Christ. However weak we may be in our faith and practice, we belong to Christ. So we are children of the Father. He draws an analogy between a rich man who has lots of servants, and they live in the house and they're comfortable, but they do not belong to the house. They're in it, but the children of the rich man are the ones that inherit the house, the kingdom, because they are begotten by the Father in the rich man's house. We are begotten by Christ in the spiritual sense. We're not ordinary people. Unfortunately, we behave like ordinary people, but our lives should be outstanding. In your work, whatever job you do, you should be outstanding in the spiritual sense. Now, that doesn't mean to be going around preaching, but because you're Orthodox and because you pray, especially if you're saying the Jesus prayer, then people are affected around you. Some adversely. I haven't come across that for a long time, maybe because I don't mix much outside of church circles. but, people feel it. And this is very important. And some of you young people who are looking at, getting married or whatever, which, one day, you have to pray to find a partner. Don't go looking in places, certainly not inappropriate places. I don't think you do, but it's, when I was growing up in the 50s, 60s, we had these discos, and everybody went have a rave up at the disco. I thought they were really good. I thought that was good, but it's not somewhere I'd want to find
awesome. It was awesome.
Awesome, yes. It's not somewhere where I want to look for a partner, But anyway, we have to be outstanding in our lives. We have to be an example to others by our life, not by preaching to people or trying to convert people. Don't do it. As I said to you before, if somebody wants to discuss the faith, especially when it's usually an argument, don't enter into it. Just say, I don't know. Just don't answer. But if it's serious inquiry, yeah, okay, answer, but don't otherwise. We have to live in the world, but we are not of the world. The beautiful illustration of this is St. John's Gospel, we are of the world, but not of it. I've chosen you. You are no longer servants. You are my friends, he says to the disciples. And the apostles carried on the work of Christ and converted people. There were 3,000 converted one day. Read the Acts of the Apostles. We're reading it at the moment in church. It's amazing. The apostles were Christ's. They weren't something secondary to Christ. They were Christ. They carried on. And he says to them, you will do things greater than me. Greater than God? Well, it's worth thinking about. So in our daily lives, we have to be an example, but we have to be a secret example, not, walking around looking pious. That's what I mean. Okay, not to be like that. We must live outstanding lives, says Macarius, like the prophets and the apostles, teaching by example. We are lights to those who dwell in darkness. We're a light to people. And people who can respond to that will then join us. Maybe not our parish, I don't mean in the physical sense, but they will be enlightened and begin to develop a faith. And here's a quote from St. Macarius. For when a person surrenders to God his secret possessions, what does that mean? When he surrenders to God his secret possessions, what do you think that means? Possessions. His secret possession. He surrenders those to God.
Treasures in your heart.
Yes. Yeah, thoughts. Passions. Well, yes, but no. Yeah, yes, but not in this context, Andrew, no. Mind and thoughts is what he's referring to. So we don't occupy ourselves. Well, let me quote. For when a person surrenders to God his secret possessions, that is, his mind and thoughts, not occupying himself with any other matter or thought or distraction, but subjecting himself to a certain constraint, then the Lord makes him a sharer in his mysteries, in holiness and great purity. He is also gives himself as heavenly food and spiritual drink. We live in the world and we have to exist in the world and we have to function, but we have to understand that we're not of the world, that God will make known his mysteries to us. There's a book that Matosha has about some pious Greek laymen leading amazing lives in simplicity of their villages. Everybody is capable of living a saintly, holy life. All of us in this room, no exception. We all can do it. It takes humility, and it takes not being a certain amount of constraint. So we don't jump to everything that's going on, Well, unfortunately we do because we have the internet. And so that is very addictive and I think is harmful. I don't think the internet is bad, and I don't think, since spears were invented, the weather changed. Sorry, I'm being a bit obtuse there, but, it's how you use something, isn't it? Not the thing in itself is necessarily bad, but, you know, the internet, I think we're too much involved in polemics, arguing, politics, entertainment. Everything is rah, 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 and we shouldn't be living in it. We don't have to live in that world. But we're not allowed to be miserable. We're not allowed to look pious. That's terrible. Also, it's a lie anyway. It's hypocrisy. Let's just be simple people, doing our job, loving people, being available, being Christ-like, and God is able to work through us. We begin, like the three fathers, Porphyrius, Paisius, Iakovos, to see with spiritual eyes. Now, so Macarius ends, well, actually he doesn't end here, but this is a part of the homily. He says that in the world, there's a world of birds. He calls it earths. I don't understand what he's using. I know what he means, but he's using the word earth. We would say world. There's a world of birds. And birds generally, of course they're always accepted, fly in the air. That's where they live, all right? That's where they function. I did study biology, so I do know about the reality of birds. They have to nest, etc., etc. And penguins don't fly, but anyway. They live in the air, all right? That's where they live. They have their own domain. Domain, I think, is probably a word. And there are animals, land animals, that live in their domain. There is also a domain that belongs to Satan and the fallen angels. That is a domain that exists. It exists as much as the world of birds or the world of animals, or the world of fishes. Sorry, I omitted fishes. In the sea. There's life in the sea. If you take a fish out of water, it dies. If a bird can't fly, it gets caught. This is what Sir Macarius says. The hunter catches the bird. And with animals, well, if the ox goes into the river, it drowns. In other words, each animal has its own domain. The demons have their domain. The angels have their domain. When you have the eyes of the heart opened, you can not only see birds flying, which anybody can do, you can see fishes swimming, you go fishing. Anybody can do that. And you see animals, etc. But with the eyes of the heart, you can see the land, the domain of the demons. With the eyes of the heart, you can see the domain of angels. Now, the domain of demons and the domain of angels are intangible. You can't touch them. And they're certainly invisible unless your heart is open. So that's what I mean by spiritual eyes. Well, that's what Sir Macarius means. And I agree, of course. It's the spiritual eyes. We begin to see things we never saw before. Now, we're not going looking for things, but we begin to have a perception of things. And certainly if you read lives of some of the monastics, men and women, in their struggle, they see demons. And they feel them because they actually attack them. They get physically beaten. That is the world that exists, all right? We mustn't dwell on that and also not have fear on that. Angelic world, yes, people see angels. Saint Iakovos complained that it was difficult to serve the liturgy because the angels were always in the way. He had to push through them to do things. Yeah. And he complained to St. John of the Russian. He used to complain about him because his relics were there, and he would complain because he did, whatever.
What was the same church?
No, it was not the same church. No, it was the other monastery. Yeah. A close relationship with the angelic world, to the degree that he actually complained about it. This is when the eyes of the heart are opened. So there's the world of birds, of land animals, of the sea, the land of Satan and the land of angels. And those last two are both intangible and invisible. yet visible to those whose spiritual eyes are opened.